What happens when we refuse to accept the inevitable? For centuries, Stoic philosophers understood what Elisabeth Sparkle is about to learn the hard way: that resistance to natural law doesn't free us, it enslaves us. The substance isn't merely body horror, it's an exploration of the mind's capacity to create its own prison. This psychological thriller holds up a mirror to our collective fears. As we follow Elisabeth's journey, we're really examining ourselves. What parts of reality are we desperately trying to edit? And at what cost are we willing to maintain these illusions? And if you haven't seen the movie yet, there are some spoilers. The heart of Elisabeth's tragedy lies in a fundamental Stoic teaching, the dichotomy of control. As Epictetus wrote in his Enchiridion, "Some things are within our power, while others are not." Elisabeth's desperate reach for the substance reveals a woman who has surrendered her power to things entirely outside her control: public opinion, youthful appearance, and external validation. When we examine her life before the substance, we see a woman accomplished in her craft, but haunted by society's shallow judgment. Her television career, built on decades of expertise, crumbles not because her wisdom diminished, but because the industry values youth over substance. Rather than focusing inward on what the Stoics would call her true worth, her character, wisdom, and inner virtue, she becomes enslaved to external approval. This pursuit inevitably leads to suffering, because external validation is, by nature, inconsistent and ultimately beyond our control. The younger Elisabeth receives adoration not because of who she truly is, but because of fleeting appearances that will, ironically, also fade with time. She trades the authentic self she could control for an illusion she cannot. As Marcus Aurelius would remind us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Elisabeth's tragedy isn't aging, it's forgetting where her true power lies. But what happens when we surrender our agency to forces outside ourselves? When we hand the keys to our happiness to others? The price Elisabeth pays isn't just physical transformation, it's the slow erosion of her very identity. And as her younger self begins to dominate, we're forced to ask, what illusions are we feeding in our own lives, and at what cost to our authentic selves? In the most haunting scenes of The Substance, we witness Elisabeth's initial euphoria as she inhabits her younger body. The parties, the admiration, the sensual experiences all feel like victory. Yet the Stoics would recognize this immediately as a dangerous trap. As Seneca wisely cautioned, pleasures, when they go beyond proper bounds, are but punishments. What Elisabeth fails to understand is the Stoic distinction between pleasure and eudaimonia, true flourishing. Pleasure is temporary, unstable, and often followed by its opposite. The younger Elisabeth experiences moments of ecstasy, but these moments are built on borrowed time. The substance doesn't grant permanent happiness. It merely postpones inevitable truth while creating new suffering. The Stoics taught that virtue, wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation is the only reliable path to genuine fulfillment. Unlike pleasure, virtue remains consistent regardless of external circumstances. Even as Elisabeth's body transforms, she could have found stability through embracing wisdom rather than youth, acceptance rather than denial, courage rather than escape. Instead, we see the pendulum swing dramatically. The pleasure of youth gives way to the horror of dependency. The freedom of beauty transforms into the prison of maintenance. What seemed like liberation becomes the ultimate confinement, both physically and psychologically. Like all shortcuts to happiness that bypass virtue, the substance extracts a terrible interest on its temporary loan of pleasure. This cycle mirrors our own modern pursuits, the endless scroll of social media dopamine hits, cosmetic quick fixes, and the constant chase for external solutions to internal problems. But what awaits us when these pleasures inevitably fade? What remains when the substance, whatever form it takes in our lives, demands its payment? The Stoics practiced a powerful meditation they called Memento Mori. Remember, you must die. Not as a morbid obsession, but as a clarifying truth that helps us live authentically. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This acceptance of mortality wasn't meant to induce fear, but to liberate us from it. Elisabeth's core tragedy is not that she ages. It's that she refuses to accept the natural order of existence. Rather than finding meaning within life's limitations, she rebels against them. Rather than embracing the wisdom that comes with time, she discards it for the illusion of endless youth. The Stoics would recognize this immediately as a fundamental error in judgment. As Seneca reminds us, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Elisabeth wastes her authentic life chasing a counterfeit one. The substance doesn't add to her existence. It subtracts from it, accelerating the very thing she fears most: her disappearance, her irrelevance, her death. Not a physical death, but something perhaps more horrifying: the erasure of her authentic self. In our own lives, how many doors do we close because we fear what lies behind them? How much genuine experience do we reject in pursuit of illusory perfection? The horror of the substance isn't what it does to Elisabeth's body. It's what it reveals about her mind. Her fear of death doesn't protect her from it. It brings a different kind of death altogether. What if, instead of running from time, she had embraced it? What if, instead of fearing the inevitable, she had used that awareness to live more fully? What different story might Elisabeth have written for herself if she had practiced what the Stoics called Amor Fati, the love of fate, even its difficult parts? "What is it that disturbs you?" asks Marcus Aurelius. "Is it the judgment of others? But look at how quickly they forget themselves." The Stoic philosophers understood something profound about human identity, that it resides not in our bodies or reputation, but in our character and the choices we make. As Elisabeth's dual existence progresses, a haunting question emerges. Which Elisabeth is real? The one with her memories, experiences and wisdom? Or the one with her name, her social security number, her professional credentials? The substance creates the ultimate identity crisis, revealing how fragile our sense of self becomes when defined by external markers rather than internal compass. The Stoics would recognize this as the fundamental error of misplaced identity. Epictetus taught that we are not our bodies, our possessions, or even our reputations. We are our capacity to choose, our faculty of judgment, our ability to distinguish between what we can and cannot control. Elisabeth loses herself precisely because she misidentifies where her true self resides. This blurring of selfhood mirrors our modern identity struggles. The carefully curated social media personas that gradually replace authentic living. The cosmetic alterations that promise transformation but deliver confusion. The pursuit of external validation that disconnects us from internal knowledge. When we anchor our identity in impermanent things, what happens when those anchors inevitably shift? The philosophical horror of the substance isn't just body horror, it's identity horror. It forces us to question, if not our youth, our beauty, our social position, what makes us us? What remains when everything external is stripped away? The Stoics would answer, our virtue, our rationality, our capacity for wisdom. The very things Elisabeth sacrificed to the substance. And if we define ourselves by illusions, what happens when they inevitably disappear? What remains when the substance, whatever form it takes in our lives, can no longer sustain the self-deception we've built around it? Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body, taught Seneca. The Stoics embraced a radical notion that suffering isn't merely something to endure, it's something that can transform us. Epictetus, born a slave and later disabled, insisted that our obstacles are opportunities for growth, not reasons for despair. Elisabeth's fundamental mistake wasn't seeking to escape pain, it was failing to recognize what her pain could teach her. The discomfort of aging, the sting of irrelevance in a youth-obsessed industry, the fear of being forgotten. These weren't merely torments to flee from. They were invitations to a deeper understanding of herself and her place in the world. The Stoics practiced what they called voluntary discomfort, deliberately facing difficult situations to strengthen their resilience. Not because they enjoyed suffering, but because they understood its value. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Elisabeth's suffering could have become her strength if she had faced it directly. What makes the substance truly horrifying isn't the physical transformation. It's the lost opportunity for genuine transformation. Elisabeth trades the chance for wisdom, acceptance, and authentic reinvention for a counterfeit solution that merely postpones the inevitable while creating new suffering. In our own lives, how often do we medicate our discomfort rather than learn from it? How frequently do we seek escape rather than understanding? The horror of the substance isn't what it does to Elisabeth's body. It's what it prevents her soul from learning. It robs her of the very growth that might have truly saved her. Because in the end, the substance wasn't the real horror. The horror was refusing to accept the truth. As the Stoics understood centuries ago, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Elisabeth's judgment that aging is unacceptable, that youth is identity, that external validation determines worth. This is what truly destroyed her. What makes the substance so compelling isn't just its body horror, it's the philosophical horror of watching someone destroy themselves by resisting what cannot be changed. But the film also invites us to imagine an alternative path, a Stoic path. Imagine an Elisabeth who, instead of fleeing from time, had used Stoic practices to navigate it with dignity. Who recognized, as Epictetus taught, that we control our judgments, desires, and aversions, not our bodies, not others' opinions, not the passage of time. Who understood that her true worth never resided in her appearance, but in her character, her wisdom, and her choices. The substance isn't just entertainment, it's a modern meditation on ancient wisdom. It reminds us that we don't control time, but we control how we face it. Elisabeth chose escape and found a prison. But each of us faces this choice daily, in small and large ways. Will we chase illusions of perfection, youth, and external validation? Or will we pursue what the Stoics called the only true path to happiness, virtue, wisdom, and acceptance? Perhaps the most powerful question the substance leaves us with is this: what if the secret to happiness isn't chasing illusions, but mastering reality? What if, instead of fleeing from our nature, we embraced it? As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." Elisabeth's tragedy ultimately wasn't aging. It was thinking incorrectly about aging. If you enjoyed this Stoic analysis of the substance, hit like and subscribe for more philosophical examinations of modern cinema. Comment below with other films you'd like to see through a Stoic lens. Remember, in the words of Epictetus, it's not what happens to you, but how you respond to it that matters. Until next time, Memento Mori. Remember your mortality and let it inspire you to live authentically today.